Hello everyone, this is Remlays from 40k Theories,
and this is Naerina,
and welcome to this new episode of 40k Lore for Newcomers. For this episode, nominated on Patreon by Asperties, we will be taking a brief look at the Ultramarines Primarch, Roboute Guilliman. This video will be a brief overview for certain events that may be explored in greater depth within additional videos in the future. So without further ado, let's begin.
The warrior who acts out of honor cannot fail. His duty is honor itself. Even his death, if it is honorable, is a reward and can be no failure, for it has come through duty. Seek honor as you act. Therefore, and you will know no fear.
Roboute Guilliman, also known as the Avenging Sun, is the Primarch of the Ultramarines Legion of the Legione Astartes, as well as the Gene Father to all modern-day Ultramarine successor chapters. Of all his brothers, Guilliman is the sole loyalist Primarch to be currently active within the modern-day Imperium, acting as the Lord Commander of its vast military forces, as well as serving as the current Imperial Regent. Not only is Guilliman a powerful and highly skilled warrior upon the battlefield, but he is also an accomplished diplomat and politician, and is also responsible for the creation of the sacred text known as the Codex Astartes, with many Space Marine chapters adhering to its tenets, even to this day. Ever the pragmatist, Guilliman is also responsible for implementing numerous contingency plans in order to safeguard the Imperium. Whether such plans involved his attempts to preserve as much of his father's Imperium as possible, or the development of an entirely new breed of Space Marine, Guilliman will plan for any potential eventuality, so that the Imperium and its countless billions of citizens will always be protected from any that may dare assail it. Following his return during arguably the Imperium's darkest hour, Guilliman has achieved victory after victory, becoming a beacon of hope for humanity and a shining ray of light in a time of uncertainty and darkness.
Man never changes, so war never changes.
During the final years of the Terran Unification Wars, the being that would one day become known throughout the galaxy as the Emperor of Mankind began the undertaking of his Primarch project. The Emperor would use his own genetic material to create 20 individuals that were effectively demigods, beings that were far larger, stronger, more intelligent and charismatic than baseline humans, and even surpassing the Thunder Warriors and Custodian Guard in terms of sheer physical potential. These beings were to serve as the generals of the Emperor's armies as the Master of Mankind began planning for his Great Crusade to bring all the worlds that had been colonized by humanity under the banner of his Imperium. However, before the Primarchs could fully mature, a tear within the fabric of reality would appear within the Emperor's gene labs, and the malevolent beings known as the Chaos Gods would scatter the capsules containing the infant Primarchs across the vast expanse of the galaxy. The capsule containing Roboute Guilliman would come to land upon Macragge, a world located deep within the eastern fringes of the galaxy in what is known today as Ultima Segmentum. The young Primarch would be discovered by a group of noblemen as they embarked upon a hunt within a region known as Horus Falls. Unsure of what to do with the child, but unwilling to abandon him, the nobles would bring the child before one of the two ruling consuls of Macragge, a man named Connor Guilliman. Seeing something special in the young child, Connor would adopt the Primarch and name him Roboute, which in the local dialect translated to Great One. The task of raising Roboute would fall primarily to Connor's steward, Tarasha Uton, who would serve as a mother figure to the Primarch. Thanks to his enhanced physiology, Roboute would rapidly grow into a man that sported great physical prowess as well as a profound intellect, and soon the Primarch would impress his elders with his knowledge and insights in arts of science, history, philosophy, politics, and military tactics. It was his proficiency in the latter that led to Connor tasking Roboute with leading a military campaign into the mountains of the Imperium region in order to pacify the primitive tribes that had been terrorizing many of the more civilized provinces for decades. Rather than engage the Illyrians in a prolonged conflict, Guilliman chose to use his intellect and diplomatic skills to put an end to the threat. After challenging their chieftain to a duel, the Primarch would seek only to defend himself against the chieftain's onslaught, preventing his foe from landing any of his attacks until they finally succumbed to exhaustion. Rather than slay his opponent, Guilliman chose to instead return a sacred artifact that had been stolen from the Illyrians centuries ago. Impressed by this act, the chieftain would agree to end his campaigns of terror, vowing that he would one day become like the Primarch. Guilliman would return to the planetary capital of Civitas, but instead of celebrating his victory, the Primarch would discover that the city was in a state of ruin and anarchy. Bands of mercenaries and ruffians in the employ of Galen, the other consul of Macragge, and a bitter rival of Connor, ransacked the city and were laying siege to its consul house. The Primarch would lead his forces into the city to crush these mercenaries in hopes of ending the chaos, and Roboute would fight his way inside the consul house in hopes of reaching his father. Roboute would find co-consul Galen, who began to explain the situation to him, claiming that these mercenaries were being coordinated by those who strove to benefit from Connor's legislative policies. Galen would lead the Primarch to Connor's last known location, but Roboute would reach his father too late, as Connor had had his throat slit and would die in his adoptive son's arms. Galen would tell Roboute that the two of them needed to reach the Senatorium for an emergency meeting of the various magistrates, with Galen suggesting that he should be appointed as the world's sole consul in order to help bring the world back into some semblance of order. Reluctantly, Guilliman would agree, and the pair would make their way to the Hall of Concord. Before entering, Galen would advise the Primarch to change into civilian robes, as seeing the Primarch dressed in full military regalia would serve only to anger and unsettle the assembled nobles, with Guilliman concurring with the consul in this matter. As he changed his attire, the serf that brought the Primarch his robes attacked Guilliman, revealing himself to be an assassin. Guilliman would learn that all the carnage wrought throughout the city and the death of his adoptive father was in fact a part of Galen's scheme to become a tyrannical dictator. Guilliman would easily dispatch the assassin before entering the Hall of Concord, witnessing Galen delivering a speech to the Senate about how both Roboute and Connor had died as a result of their arrogance. The Primarch approached the podium and confronted Galen, who in his shock, anger and frustration would eventually confess to his crimes. Despite being tempted to strike down the man who murdered his father, Guilliman could not, declaring to the assembled nobles that to pass judgment is not the task of a single man, and implored the Senate to vote. Needless to say, the senators and nobles that had assembled would declare Galen a traitor, who would be taken away to be executed for his crimes. Impressed with his ability to act both rationally and calmly in the face of the man who murdered his father, the nobility of Macragge would unanimously vote for Roboute to act as the world's sole consul, with the Primarch declaring before them that Macragge would endure.
It is the great irony of the legions Astartes, engineered to kill to achieve a victory of peace that they can then be no part of.
As Guilliman was conducting his campaign against the Illyrians, the Emperor of Mankind would hear of the Primarch's existence when his fleet reached the world of Espandor. Concluding that Guilliman was one of his Primarchs, the Emperor would set course for Macragge, although it would take roughly 5 years for the Emperor's forces to reach the world due to the unexpected onset of an intense warp storm. During his time as the ruler of Macragge, Roboute Guilliman would begin establishing trade links with hundreds of nearby worlds throughout the sector. Thanks primarily to his unparalleled diplomatic skills, the Primarch would eventually integrate these worlds into an empire that would become known as the Realm of Ultramar, or the 500 Worlds. the Emperor's forces would finally arrive within orbit of Macragge, and the Master of Mankind was impressed with the prosperous empire that his gene-son had cultivated. Upon meeting his creator, Guilliman would swear fealty to him and the Imperium, and the Emperor would grant the Primarch command over the 13th Legion of the Legione Astartes, those crafted from his gene line. The Primarch would rename his legion to the Ultramarines and establish Macragge as the legion's new homeworld. Guilliman would lead the Ultramarines in hundreds of campaigns, and thanks to the Primarch's keen tactical genius, not only would the legion bring a higher number of worlds into compliance than most of the other legions, but the Ultramarines would suffer comparatively few casualties as a result. While Guilliman would grow to respect most of his brothers, 4 in particular he would hold in particularly high esteem: Rogaldorn of the Imperial Fists, Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, Leman Russ of the Space Wolves, and Sanguinius of the Blood Angels. These 4 brothers, which Guilliman dubbed the Dauntless Few, were regarded by the Ultramarines Primarch as being the most dependable and trustworthy of his brothers, and Guilliman believed that, with the aid of any one of their legions, the Ultramarines would be capable of defeating any foe. When Horus, the Primarch of the Lunar Wolves Legion, was named as War Master by the Emperor, Guilliman would fully support the Emperor's decision, as he genuinely believed from a purely logical standpoint that Horus was the best candidate for the position. Horus in turn would grow to value Guilliman's skills and counsel as a tactician. However, one event that would have profound consequences for Guilliman and his legion would be the Scouring of Monarchia. The Wordbearers Legion, against the Emperor's wishes, would raise various churches and cathedrals dedicated to the worship of the Emperor as a god. The Ultramarines would be tasked by the Emperor with destroying the holy city of Monarchia upon the world of Kur, to show the Wordbearers Primarch Lorgar that such religious veneration and superstition would not be tolerated within the Imperium. In the wake of the city's destruction, the entire Wordbearers Legion would seek to confront the Ultramarines over their actions. However, upon their arrival to the world, Lorgar would be reprimanded and humiliated by the Emperor in front of his legion, Malcador the Sigillite, and Roboute Guilliman. In private, Guilliman would admit that he disagreed with his legion being used as a tool to shame his brother, and that such an act had genuinely upset him. While this course of events would inevitably drive a wedge between the Ultramarines and the Wordbearers, Lorgar's faith in the Emperor himself would be irreparably broken. In turn, this would eventually lead to one of the most brutal and violent conflicts to occur during the Horus Heresy.
What does not kill me is not trying hard enough.
Following Horus's decision to rebel against the Emperor, the War Master would begin making plans to deal with those legions that he believed would never be swayed to his cause, so as to prevent them from reinforcing terror when Horus decided to launch his assault upon it. To this end, the War Master would inform Guilliman, who at this point remained unaware of Horus's treachery, that both the Ultramarines and the Wordbearers were to muster against an Orc incursion within the Viridian system. As the Ultramarines mustered their forces upon the world of Kolth, the Wordbearers would launch a surprise assault against Guilliman's forces, inflicting heavy casualties on the 13th Legion. It would be revealed that the Wordbearers had underestimated their foes, as despite the losses suffered by the Legion, the Ultramarines continued to battle fiercely against the traitors. Lorgar would attempt to assassinate his brother by summoning a demonic entity upon the bridge of Guilliman's flagship, Macragge's Honor, eventually forcing the Primarch to be dragged into the void. Despite lacking a helmet, Guilliman would continue his fight against the Wordbearers, dispatching countless numbers of them single-handedly before returning to his ship. As the battle for Calth came towards its conclusion, Cor Pharaon, the first captain of the Wordbearers and adoptive father of Lorgar, would attempt to sway Guilliman to the traitor's cause, despite having a chance to assassinate him. However, the Primarch would remain loyal to the Emperor, and would even rip one of the traitor's hearts from his chest, forcing the Wordbearer to flee. Guilliman then vowed to hunt down and kill Lorgar for his treacherous actions. Following the battle, Guilliman's forces would journey to the outer fringes of Ultramar, as the Primarch had learned that whilst his forces were occupied at Kulth, Lorgar, alongside the World Eater's Primarch Angron, had launched what was deemed a shadow crusade against the Ultramarines, hoping to lay waste to as many loyalist worlds as possible. Guilliman would eventually pursue Lorgar to the world of New Syria, the world Angron had landed on following the Primarch's scattering, and would face off against the Wordbearer's Primarch in combat. Despite Lorgar being considered the weakest of the Primarchs, Guilliman was surprised at how strong and capable in battle his treacherous brother had become. The Ultramarines' Primarch would have bested Lorgar there and then, were it not for Angron's interference. The sheer savagery of Angron proved to be too much for Guilliman, and were it not for the timely arrival of his Gene-sons, the Lord of Ultramar could very well have perished, though thankfully he would escape and live to fight another day. Following a sorcerer's ritual that led to the creation of Ruinstorm, Guilliman feared that Terra itself had been lost due to a loss of contact. Seeking to preserve as much of his father's Imperium as possible, the Primarch would begin the creation of what he deemed Imperium Secundus. Thanks to a piece of ancient Xenos technology known as the Pharos Beacon, numerous Imperial forces were able to navigate through the Ruinstorm in order to reach Macragge. The Dark Angels Legion, led by their Primarch Lionel Johnson, would soon arrive in the orbit of the world, with Johnson being initially distrustful of his brother's motives. Despite being the founder of Imperium Secundus, Guilliman did not wish to be declared as Emperor, fearing that to do so would make him appear as vain and power-hungry as Horus. Instead, despite his own misgivings towards his brother, Guilliman urged for Johnson to bear the title, but the Lion was equally hesitant to do so. During this particularly turbulent time, Guilliman would come close to death a number of times. A squad of Alpha Legion warriors disguised as Ultramarines would unsuccessfully attempt to assassinate the Primarch. When Conrad Kurtz, the Primarch of the Night Lord's Legion, was discovered to be active upon Macragge, both Johnson and Guilliman would battle against their brother. Despite outnumbering and outmatching their traitorous brother, the two loyalists would almost be slain when Kurtz lured the pair into a trap, detonating a number of explosives in an attempt to collapse a building on top of Guilliman and Johnson. Thanks to the swift actions of the loyalist Iron Warrior Barnabas d'Antioch, Guilliman and Johnson would be transported to the world of Sutha, where the Pharos Beacon was located. Guilliman would then journey back to Macragge with Johnson, where they would discover that the Blood Angels Legion had also reached the world. The Blood Angels Primarch Sanguinius would reluctantly allow himself to be declared as the ruler of Imperium Secundus, but instead of holding the title of Emperor, Sanguinius would declare himself as Emperor Regent. During this time, Guilliman and Johnson would continue to butt heads with one another politically. When a series of insurrectionist uprisings began to manifest across Macragge, Johnson would express to his brothers that he believed that Kurtz was the instigator of these rebellions and would begin to obsessively hunt for the Night Haunter. When an Astartes convoy was attacked by rebels, Johnson, against Guilliman's wishes, would take it upon himself to implement martial law. While Kurtz would eventually be captured by Johnson, Guilliman insisted that their treasonous brother be given a public trial, to which Johnson would reluctantly acquiesce. Guilliman and Sanguinius would force Johnson to leave, at least temporarily, when the Dark Angels Primarch almost slew Kurtz during the trial. Eventually, after learning that Terra still stood, Guilliman and his brothers agreed to try and navigate the Ruinstorm in order to reinforce the world against the inevitable Traitor Legion assault. Imperium Secundus was officially resolved as the three legions began to head for Terra. This would eventually lead towards the Second Battle of Davin, and in turn create a breach in the storm that allowed the Blood Angels to reach Terra, while the Ultramarines and Dark Angels held traitor forces at bay. After the Ruinstorm dissipated, the Ultramarines would begin their slow journey to Terra. Despite his best efforts, Guilliman would ultimately arrive too late to participate in the defense of the world. But thankfully, Loyalist forces would triumph over the traitors, and Horus would be slain by the Emperor. In the aftermath of the heresy, Guilliman would begin to implement a number of contingency plans so that events similar to those of the Horus Heresy could never unfold again. The first of these would be through the introduction of his Codex Astartes, which would break down the legions into a number of smaller chapters so that no one man could wield the power of a legion. The second would be to begin the development of an entirely new breed of Space Marine, which could be unleashed to aid the Imperium in its darkest hour. With the aid of the Archmachus Dominus of the Adeptus Mechanicus Belisarius Call, Guilliman would initiate what would become known as the Primaris Project.
They shall be pure of heart and strong of body, untainted by doubt and unsullied by self-aggrandizement. They will be bright stars on the firmament of battle, angels of death whose shining wings bring swift annihilation to the enemies of man. So it shall be for 1,000 times, for 1,000 years, unto the very end of eternity and the extinction of mortal flesh.
Not long after the culmination of the heresy, Guilliman would lead his Gene Sons in a number of campaigns against the traitor legions during the Great Scouring. During the Battle of Escrador, Guilliman would lead the Ultramarines in an assault against the Alpha Legion, where he is rumoured to have slain their Primarch Alfarius in single combat, although the veracity of such a claim is still debated. Later, Guilliman would lead a host of Ultramarine successor chapters against the Emperor's children during the Battle of Thessala. Guilliman would lead a boarding action against the traitor's flagship, meeting his treasonous brother Fulgrim in the heart of the vessel. However, Fulgrim had by this point ascended to demonhood, and would ultimately prove victorious in their duel, with the demon Primarch slitting Guilliman's throat with one of his poisoned blades. Distraught at the sight of their Gene Father falling in battle, the Ultramarines would swiftly withdraw, allowing Fulgrim to escape. Unable to treat their Primarch's wounds, Guilliman would be interred within a stasis field in a last-ditch attempt to save his life. Guilliman's body would be placed within a great shrine located within the Temple of Correction upon Macragge. This shrine would go on to become one of the holiest sites throughout the entire Imperium, with countless thousands of pilgrims flocking to pay their respects to the Primarch for his sacrifice on a regular basis. For the next 10,000 years, the Primarch would remain in stasis, trapped in a limbo between life and death. And yet, this would not be the end of the Primarch's story. In late M41, during the final hours of Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade, the Primarch would return to the world of the living once more. Thanks to the science of Belisarius Call and the sorcerous abilities of the Eldari witch Yvraine, Guilliman would awaken from stasis, clad within the life support systems of the Armour of Fate and wielding the sword of the Emperor himself. When the Primarch awakened, he did so during the midst of a great battle between the Ultramarines and the Black Legion. Seeing that his Gene Sons were engaged in battle, the Primarch would enter the fray. With their Primarch fighting by their side once more, the Ultramarines would succeed in driving away the forces of the Black Legion, who had been completely broken by the sheer ferocity of the Primarch. After learning of the changes that had occurred throughout the Imperium during the past 10,000 years, Guilliman would grow disgusted and disheartened at how backwards and superstitious his father's empire had become. Eventually, the Primarch declared that he would lead a crusade to Terra in order to speak to his father, with a coalition of Imperial forces accompanying him. During the course of this crusade, Guilliman would liberate numerous worlds from the taint of chaos. Eventually, the Primarch's forces would be driven into the warp space rift known as the Maelstrom, following an ambush by the Thousand Sons Traitor Legion led by their demonic Primarch, Magnus the Red. As Imperial forces attempted to navigate their way through the Maelstrom, Guilliman would be taken prisoner by the Red Corsair's Chaos Space Marine warband after being defeated by the Lord of Change, Kairos Fateweaver. The Primarch, along with several other members of the Imperial expedition, would be incarcerated within the Blackstone fortress of the Chaos Lord, Huron Blackheart. However, Guilliman and the other loyalists would escape through a webway gate, thanks to the intervention of the Eldari Harlequin Salandri Veilwalker and the mysterious Dark Angel known as Cypher, with Guilliman even managing to defeat the demon Scarbrand in the process. Eventually, Guilliman and his forces would exit from the webway onto the surface of Luna, Terra's moon. Before the portal could be sealed, however, the Thousand Suns would emerge behind them, leading to a fierce battle between Imperial and traitor forces. The two Primarchs would engage one another in a fierce duel as the battle raged around them, and Magnus would come close to overwhelming his brother, but thanks to the timely arrival of reinforcements from the Adeptus Custodes, Sisters of Silence, and the Imperial Fists, the Thousand Suns would be forced to withdraw. The Loyalists would then journey to the Imperial Palace and would aid the Custodes in their defense against a mass demonic incursion during the Second Battle of Terra. As this battle unfolded, a colossal warp tear would be created, spreading across the vast expanse of the galaxy, splitting the Imperium in two, with the two halves eventually being documented as Imperium Sanctus and Imperium Nihilus. Following the culmination of the battle, Guilliman would lock himself away within his father's throne room, where he would remain for several days and nights in conversation with the Emperor. Upon emerging, Guilliman would be appointed as the Lord Commander of the Imperium, as well as the acting Imperial Regent, with the Primarch even being regarded as the living hand of the Emperor. The new Regent would go on to not only unveil the fruits of his Primaris project, the Primaris Space Marines, but would also declare the start of a new crusade to liberate the galaxy from the taint of chaos, known as the Indomitus Crusade. During the course of this crusade, Guilliman would begin to make many alterations to the Codex Astartes in order to accommodate the addition of Primaris Marines. As the forces of the Crusade made their way across the galaxy, thousands of worlds would be cleansed of chaotic taint, and Space Marine chapters would be reinforced with the addition of Primaris recruits. As the Crusade made its way into the Baal system, which was located within Imperium Nihilus, the Primarch would name Dante, the chapter master of the Blood Angels, as the regent of this darkened half of the Imperium. Guilliman would eventually return to the realm of Ultramar following the news that the demon Primarch Mortarion and his Death Guard Legion had launched a series of assaults against it. This would lead to a series of battles known within Imperial records as the Plague Wars. Guilliman would defeat his corrupted brother upon the world of Iax, forcing the Death Guard to flee. Since then, Guilliman has led his Gene Sons into battle against countless foes, with his presence inspiring those loyal to the Emperor and bringing fear to those in service to Chaos. And that concludes this episode of 40k Lore for Newcomers.
If you like this video, consider supporting us on Patreon for more content.
To those who are new to 40k, we hope you learned something. So leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.